up this crowd. 10,000 people came to hear Tucker Carlson speak today, and I think I speak for all of us when I say we're finally ready to liberate Canada. For those of you who don't know me, my name is and I'm the Alberta correspondent for True North, one of Canada's few, but fantastic, independent media companies. Now, before we get started with tonight's events, there's a couple special people I'd like to thank. How many of you are here tonight because of someone else's generosity? Patricia Toddler and Gwen Morgan. Let's hear it for them. And of course, tonight would not be possible without our main title sponsors, Bow Valley Credit Union and Silver Gold Bowl. Now, I actually bank with Bow Valley, so you know it's good. But if that doesn't convince you, they also invest in gold and silver. And personally, I sleep better at night knowing that my bank owns 1/3 of a ton in precious metals. Speaking of precious metals, is there anyone here tonight who'd like to win a gold coin? For your chance to be entered, you can scan the QR code on the pamphlets that were handed out, or just make sure to grab one on your way out later tonight. For your chance to win a Canadian Maple Leaf gold coin generously provided by Silver Gold Bowl. We have some amazing speakers for you tonight. John Carpay of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is here, and I think I speak for all of us when I say I'm so grateful for the amazing work they did standing up for our civil liberties during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have a man who needs no introduction, Lord Conrad Black. Unfortunately, Rex Murphy isn't able to be here tonight, and he sends his condolences. But Edmonton, I do have one other surprise for you. Taking the place of Rex Murphy is the one and only Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Edmonton appearance, Mr. Tucker Carlson. Now, the left is a little hesitant of Tucker Carlson, to say the least. And honestly, can you blame them? The man flew to Edmonton in January, mere days after an energy crisis. Rachel Nolby is so afraid of Tucker Carlson that when she heard he was coming, she quit. Now, we all know it's been a bad month for the federal government. Yesterday, the federal court ruled that the Trudeau Liberals were unreasonable when they voted. Justin Trudeau was so ashamed that he rightfully couldn't show his face today. And honestly, I think that a visit from Tucker Carlson to Ottawa this month might finally be enough to send Justin Trudeau packing. if regular Albertans froze to death in the dark. Speaking of which, because Ottawa won't do it, I think it's high time we give our amazing energy workers a round of applause.
Yes, yes.
Now, I promise I won't ruin your evening. I won't speak about the feds too much longer. But I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker. She's someone who stands up tirelessly to the federal government. She also takes a lot of crap from the radical left mainstream media. Ladies and gentlemen, she stands up for you, so please stand up for her and join me in welcoming the Premier of Alberta.
Earlier today, I joined Tucker in Calgary, and we had an important conversation about Alberta and Canada and how we can help the world and the United States in particular. Rachel, of course, mentioned, and you all know, that our power grid almost failed about a week ago. And you know why that was? Because there was no wind or solar after 5 o'clock at night. We were saved by natural gas and by the actions of each and every one of you. Big, hairy, audacious goal, not of reducing our production of oil and natural gas. We should be doubling our production. Because who should America want to buy their product from? Venezuela or Iran? They should be wanting to buy it from their friends in Canada. We are more than willing to sell it to them. To liberate us from Justin Trudeau. I asked him, because he puts a lot of heat on our Prime Minister, if he can save a little of that heat for Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault and help him get that out. So tonight we have the opportunity of engaging in another thought-provoking discussion with Tucker and his guests, Jordan Peterson and Conrad. That free speech is the cornerstone of a thriving democracy, and that's because it facilitates an open dialogue. It enables the free exchange of ideas and opinions and perspectives between people with varying views. In a democratic society, the unrestricted flow of information empowers individuals to express their views, challenge the status quo, and challenge our own views as we actively shape our collective future. Now, having open and honest discussions like this are unfortunately becoming more of a rarity. And that's because, and that's why, it's more important now than ever that we think critically and we hear out various viewpoints and we engage in debate. Because in today's world, cancel culture has not only censored people, but people are actively censoring themselves over the fear of being canceled. That's right. Love you too. Now, I'm sure we have a few students here tonight, and I think you would agree that you shouldn't be afraid to write a paper for a poli-sci class with your own thoughts in it because your professor might dock you marks, and that's what's happening out there right now at our universities. And I know there are many people, including the mainstream media, CBC, who was in Calgary today. I'm not sure if they had the courage to show up here tonight. But they've expressed concern or dissatisfaction at me participating in Tucker's Alberta events. And I challenge these folks to remember that as a society, whether it be a politician, the media, or any one of us inside this room, we have a vital role in bringing people together to discuss difficult and controversial ideas, just as any of us would do in our homes, with our friends and our family. And I've said many times, if we only talk to people we agree with, we wouldn't talk to many people outside our own corners. So I'm happy that Tucker decided to host his events right here in Alberta, because as a province known for its diversity and resilience, we serve as the perfect backdrop for this conversation that emphasizes the importance of bringing people together, even when faced with differing opinions. And our goal today is not to just talk about controversial topics, but to embody the spirit of free and open dialogue in a respectful way. Let's remember the power of respectful disagreement and the shared responsibility we have in creating a society where diverse perspectives are not only welcomed, but celebrated. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't extend a note of acknowledgement and gratitude to the Edmonton Police Service and their amazing chief, Dale McPhee. Downtown Edmonton for a while. I'd encourage you to do it if you're from town or if you're from out of town, because it hasn't been a safe place for a couple of years. But the chief has been working on closing down those gang-operated drug camps. He's made incredible progress over this past week. And I've told Tucker about our Alberta model. Our Alberta model with our recovery-oriented system of care, it's not just about law enforcement, it's building recovery communities. With our Indigenous partners, building out shelters, creating a navigation center so that we can help those get the help they need. Now, you know what the left wants to do? The left wants safe supply. They want to trap people in their addiction. They're now even talking about giving fentanyl to minors in British Columbia as a safe supply without even telling parents. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's no such thing as a safe supply of fentanyl or heroin. Chance at life, and that's why we go for treatment. So if you have a chance to stop into the Edmonton Police Service, I know a lot of people have going in, thanking Chief McPhee for the work that he's doing. Our aspiration is to remove every single one of these gang-operated drug camps and never see them come back, because this city belongs to you. So thank you for supporting us and helping the Edmonton Police Service achieve this great goal. And thank you for joining us tonight. Now, without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Tucker Carlson. Please help me in welcoming our next speaker, John Carpe.
Thank you, Danielle. My name is John Carpe. I'm the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. It's a great honor for me tonight to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, a man who is pro-freedom, who is not politically correct, who is not afraid to ask the difficult questions that need to be asked, a man who does not believe unquestioningly the media narratives that we receive about COVID and lockdowns and vaccine passports and transgender ideology and woke ideology. A man who demands to see the evidence from government to see if the media narrative is true or not. This man speaks truth to power in the United States, here in Canada, and globally. And here in Canada, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is honored to play a part in fighting for the rights and freedoms of Canadians in the court of law, in the court of public opinion. How many people heard about the court ruling yesterday? That's an example of the Justice Center's work. We are the organization which, thanks to the donations of Canadians, we're able to provide the lawyers to those applicants who went before federal court, who talked about how their bank accounts were frozen, who talked about how they were mistreated, who talked about the tyranny of the police, who talked about the ruthless suppression of a peaceful protest. And so 23 months later, we get this court ruling that the federal government acted illegally. Here in Alberta, we sued the Alberta government under Jason Kenney and received the Ingram ruling in July to strike down and invalidate all of these irrational and unscientific lockdown measures. So I'm truly grateful and thankful to those of you who support the work that we are doing every day. You're the ones who make it possible. And now the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, we stand with our Speaker as we say yes to freedom of expression and no to censorship. And we stand with our keynote speaker as we say yes to free and independent media and no to government control over what we see and hear. We say yes to freedom of religion and conscience and no to totalitarian woke ideology. We say yes to the dignity of every human being created in the image of God, and we say no to government tyranny. Please join me in welcoming an advocate for truth, an advocate for justice, an advocate for freedom, Tucker Carlson.
And the second you decide to tell the truth about something, you are filled with this, I don't want to get supernatural, but you are filled with this power from somewhere else. Try it. Tell the truth about something. You feel it every day. The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
In my life. I could not believe I'm in a hockey arena in Edmonton, Canada in January. This is the cool. My friend Theo Furry is here. Theo Furry. Thank you. I am thrilled to be here. Alberta, that's exactly right. Al Freakenberta, as we call it. I was so excited to be here that I actually called the CBC and I said I'm in town, which they were aware of, and I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to talk to as many Canadians as possible. And we talked to a very nice guy. I think he's new there. And he's like, sure. And we called back, and they actually were speaking Calgary earlier, and they had a CBC guy there, and I said, look, I would love to talk to the CBC. I'll answer any question you like, and I dare you to put it on TV. No. And I wasn't just outraged because there's a state media organization that's totally opposed to free speech, which is a little weird since the media should be the defenders of the things that, make their careers possible. But it also offended me personally because I feel like I have some ownership of the CBC, not because I'm a Canadian taxpayer, but because I am secretly, and I never reveal this part, Canadian. And I wouldn't say this, honestly, to an audience in Los Angeles or New York or Denver, because I don't want to be singled out, or treated differently. But it's actually true. My dad's family's from Nova Scotia. And actually, we had a place in Nova Scotia my whole life. until a few years ago when we sold it to a guy called Gerald Cotton, who mysteriously died sort of colitis in India with the keys to like $1 billion in Bitcoin. And the New York Times called me and suggested I was in on his Bitcoin scam. For the record, I'm not. But anyway, I have ties to this country, and I spent a lot of my life coming here, and I just love it. And that's why I'm here. And I mean that. And I like Canada because I understand what Canada is, and it's not, I'm not attacking Toronto, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. By the way, I mispronounce all Canadian names just to infuriate people and see if I can make them laugh, but they never do. I'm in Alberta, Calgary, Ottawa, in Canada, and no one ever, thank you for laughing. Everyone accused the Canadians of being humorless, they're just too polite to laugh in public, so thank you. And I called it Ottawa many, many times, and I get these outraged, you don't even know enough about our country to pronounce the name correctly. And of course, it was intentional until I received a very sincere email from an Ojibwa First Nations leader who said, actually, it's called Ottawa. And they've been mispronouncing it all these years. I'm not making that up. And if you have any Ojibwa friends, ask them. It's Ottawa. So your creepy prime minister can put on the costumes of other cultures, but he doesn't really understand them. But I'll be honest, there are two things that I like about Canada, and both are totally sincere. This is not a panda. One, I like the physical country. I think it's the prettiest country in the world. And I mean that. And I've been all over it, and no one in Canada talks about it, actually. You know, they talk about cool things about Canada, but they never mention the fact that it's prettier than Switzerland, and it's the second biggest country in the world, and there are only 40 million people in it. And I think that's the greatest ratio I can imagine. And I hear your friends in Ottawa saying we've got to make this country as packed as Bangladesh because a crowded country is a happy country. And I think to myself, you're really sick, actually. I've been in places in Labrador and northern Quebec that I'm not sure another human being has ever been to. Your mountain's not far from here. You go there and there's like not another person around, just you and what God made. And it's just the most inspiring, edifying experience. And if I were Prime Minister of Canada, I would take some public lands and I would allocate them to the entire 40 million who live here, and I would say everybody gets 6 acres, and I command you to spend at least a week there. I mean it. And get out of your little cube with your food delivery and your weed and your stupid internet service, and go sit in the dirt in God's most beautiful country and enjoy it. And then you'll understand what Canada is. I mean it. And go catch a trout. And you don't have to kill it, but catch it. And see the kind of fish or a walleye. You don't have to go shoot a moose, though you can. But you should know the country that you live in. And you shouldn't just be clustered near the border of, like, Detroit. What? Spread out a little. And people who have a little bit of contact with the natural world and the animals that live in it are a little bit clear thinking, I have to say. And I met a bunch of them tonight in the photo line. And you can just feel the vibe coming off them. These are people who are taking the long view on life because they know what it is, and they know how precious it is, and they know how little control they have. Because when you farm, you really don't have control. And I don't care how many agronomy degrees you have or how clever you are in your planning, in the end you don't control the weather. Despite, the really fierce attempts of the US government to control the weather, they don't. And neither does Justin Trudeau. He doesn't, because he's not God. I don't want to blow his mind or anything. And when you realize that you're not God, you have hit upon the root of all wisdom. I am not God. All goodness flows from that realization. If you don't reach that conclusion, then in the end, you find yourself very tempted to commit genocide. Because it's true. And everyone who has reached the conclusion, the same conclusion, I am God. So let's just start there. So anyway, I love this country, and I admire its natural resources, and I think you could have one of the greatest economies in the world with a population of 40 million and some of the deepest energy reserves in the world and mineral deposits in the world. And I've been to a lot of your extraction sites, I'm just saying. And, extraction is an ugly business by its nature, but Canadians, true to form, have really done their best to make it as tidy and respectful as they can. I've seen it firsthand. We've never seen more conscientious energy extraction than in Canada. They apologize for taking it out. It's great. So I love that. And the other thing I love about Canada are the people, and I love the thing that other people mock Canadians for, which is their politeness. Their sort of Anglo commitment to never offending you no matter what, no matter how much they hate you. Even the CBC today, they were sort of apologizing for calling me a Nazi, well, we love you. We have to have another meeting, and we're going to do another segment on intersectionality. And obviously, they know that I'm a racist because I don't believe in climate change and I'm not trans, because that makes sense. And that's the sum total of their entire programming schedule. Flip on to the CBC. In breaking news, say you're a racist. Eh? Yeah. So obviously they're loathsome and bent on my destruction, but they're very polite about it, which I appreciate. I do, because I believe in, there's Theo Floyd right there. Without my glasses, I think. And I appreciate that. I do appreciate that. And I strive to be a politer person, and I'm not always, and I obviously, can offend people and use profanity, but in my heart, as an Anglo, honestly, I really strive to be polite. And you all pull it off in a way that's just remarkable and admirable. And thank you for that, for adding to the sum total of civility in the world. But thank you. But here's my concern. And it's part of a larger concern that people's best qualities are leveraged against them. And that what unscrupulous people in power do, if they're smart, is they don't dispatch an army of young men in tight uniforms to goose step through your town because it's a little bit too obvious. You've seen that movie. And you sort of know what happens next. You take up arms, you form a resistance, you drive the people out, and freedom returns, right? You guys have seen that movie. It's been done about 50,000 times. And if only that's what we were facing. Because that is straightforward. That's the kind of masculine expression of fascism. But the West is now facing a far slyer opponent, which is the feminine expression of fascism. The Chrystia Freeland version of fascism. And I know a lot about this because I knew Chrystia Freeland when she, was a journalist at the Financial Times, whose name shall forever live in infamy for employing her. And I remember even then thinking, this woman is not bright at all. But boy, does she have high self-esteem. I don't think I've ever even seen it's off the, I don't know what the self-esteem measurement scale is, the Richter scale. But her self-esteem was literally unassailable. It was bomb-proof. If a nuclear bomb dropped on your town, you could hide beneath Chrystia Freeland's self-esteem and live. There's nothing you could do to shake it. Nothing. No amount of evidence of her stupidity and wrong decisions and idiotic views could dissuade her from the core belief that she was awesome and you were not. And I kind of stood back in admiration. So I guess I shouldn't be totally shocked that she's helping to run and destroy your country. But she's doing it in her signature way. She's not getting on the CBC, her media outlet, which like almost all outlets in this wonderful oppressed country is run by the government. It's all state media. It's Albania 1985. And I'm sure we have people whose families were refugees from Albania. Welcome. And you know what I'm talking about. But at least you could say of the Albanian leader in 1985, Enver Hoxha, that when he went full fascist, he just didn't mince words. Shut up and obey or we'll shoot you. Chrystia Freeland is wise enough, clever enough, in her serpent-like way, to make it all about your protection and safety. All about your protection and safety. No, we're just trying to help you. That's why you're in shackles. You're being arrested right now for your safety. Oh, it's for the common good. Don't worry, you'll understand. I always want to say, Mrs. Freeland, can I go to the bathroom? No, you can't. And you can just imagine her taking great glee as your fourth grade self wet his pants in class as Mrs. Freeland refuses to let you go to the bathroom. So that's kind of more diabolical than what we've seen in previous generations, and it's much more effective in a committedly polite country like Canada, because you don't know that it's happening. And because a demagogue like that, or your completely bizarre, cross-dressing prime minister, it's true, Prime Minister Blackface, I didn't wear blackface, he did. He, 3 times, thank you. 3 times, and I want to thank you for your commitment to the fact. The Prime Minister, right, the Prime Minister, their attack on your rights, which is an attack on you and your children, is cloaked in the language of therapy, self-help, and compassion. You're doing this for the common good. Don't you care about the elderly? And of course, being a decent person, you care very deeply about the elderly and the weakest in your society, of course. So what you don't realize as you shuffle off to abandon another God-given right to a totalitarian government is that this is not being done on behalf of a marginalized group or the weakest among us or the elderly. They hijack the language of the gospel to crush the gospel. That's exactly what they're doing. And it's hard to sort of see this when you're right in the middle of it. If you've ever had a friend who is married to an alcoholic and gets divorced, and everyone comes up and says, wow, your spouse was a raging drunk. And oftentimes, the spouse is like, didn't really know. If you live with someone whose behavior is completely off the chain, sometimes you're not aware of it because you're too close to it. So let me just tell you from my perspective, as a foreigner, a semi-foreigner, with some Canadian blood in my veins, what I'm seeing. And here are the markers for the malice that undergirds these expressions of false compassion. We're just trying to help. Really? They're trying to help? How does it help you or your family when the government of British Columbia gives fentanyl to your children without your knowledge? That is literally happening right now. And it's been stopped by the premier here, who's not giving fentanyl to children. Amen. Bravo. But it is happening right down the road, right over the mountains in British Columbia. What is that? It's not an expression of compassion. Fentanyl is the #1 killer of people under 40 in the United States. #1. There's no safe dosage of fentanyl. It's a poison. Manufactured in Mexico with Chinese precursors designed to kill people, and it does. And so to hand that to children without their parents' knowledge is what? An attempt to kill your children. What else could it be? That's not compassion. There's no other way to read that. And I just fear if you're in the middle of a society that says that's okay, or it's on the spectrum of okay, it's something that we should consider, you may lose sight of the fact that that's not only completely unacceptable, it's a declaration of war against you and your children. People who are trying to kill your children are not your friend. They're your sworn blood enemy. Is there another way to interpret that? Am I being crazy? I don't think that I am. And in less developed countries, this would be very obvious. Go try that in Burkina Faso. I'm serious. Show up in a Ouagadougou next week with a briefcase full of fentanyl and say, I'm going to pass this out to the neighborhood kids, but I'm not going to tell the parents. Those would be your last words. You would be ripped apart. You're coming to kill my children? No. They don't even have electricity in parts of Burkina Faso, but they have a gut-level sense that your primary duty on this earth is to protect your children. If you can't protect your children, and not even spiritually or intellectually, just physically, then who are you? You're a husk. You're a shameful husk. That's what you are. There's no greater dereliction. There's no worse abandonment than leaving your children to be harmed in the hands of others. So, obviously, try that in Eastern Europe. Even Eastern Europe, which does have electricity. And by the way, no homelessness or graffiti or public drug use. How are they pulling that off? Amazing. I guess Bucharest, Romania is a lot more advanced than New York City now. Because they won't put up with it. And they won't put up with the tax on their own children. because they haven't been socialized to the point where they've lost their souls. That's the truth. The MAID program, which nobody wants to talk about, because nobody, and again, this is not an attack, it's a compliment. People here, I'm from a very similar culture, don't want to talk about things that make other people uncomfortable. So it really is a Christmas dinner among the Episcopalians, where there's a lot of sort of semi-drunk, sullen silentness. You know what I mean? As people kind of secretly resent each other, but no one can say anything about it. And apparently, at some point someone get drunk enough just to say, I hate you! Everyone puts their heads down again. The government of Canada is killing Canadians, and not just a few, and not just the terminally ill. Over 50,000. So 50,000! Any organization that kills 50,000 people is a genocidal organization. Period. And I don't care how you dress it up. That's just a fact. That's like a bottom line on a chart. How many people have you killed? Oh, 50,000. Oh. You're not in the good guy category. Sorry, we can't. We're going to bring you up at the Hague, actually, where you should be. And now, under consideration, apparently next month, is a plan to expand the MAID program, the systematic killing of Canadians, not all of whom were terminally ill, many of whom are just sad, because Canadian society has made them sad. They're going to expand that to children. And that's the point at which you have to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to be polite anymore. You literally can't do that. And I don't care if someone, you don't need to be, by the way, a religious freak to think it's wrong for a government to kill people at scale. And I don't care, choice, they'll dress it up. No, it's totally evil, is the truth. And it's deeply revealing of who they are and what they want. It's deeply revealing. The standard of living in Canada, which secretly a lot of no American would ever tell you this, because no American ever wants to think about Canada or admit that there are things about Canada that are cooler than the United States, including the Rockies, by the way, which are better. Sorry. But one of the things Canada always had was this incredibly robust middle class. It didn't have these super jagged wealth distributions that the United States had. It was much more like Scandinavia than Dallas. And I personally always liked that. I did. I mean, the downside was some of your, most energetic people left because they wanted to become billionaires, but a lot of really smart people stayed because they liked being around people like them and their neighbors and whatever. That is dying before your eyes. The Canadian standard of living is in free fall. At exactly the moment when Canada is importing more people per capita than any nation in the world. It's the highest immigration rate in the world. So this is something that no Canadian will talk about. And you have to ask why. Well, there are two reasons. The first reason is, aforementioned, they don't want to offend anybody, and it's touchy, and no one wants to be called a racist. It has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with population numbers and the strain on available resources, public and private. Housing prices, for example. Your healthcare system, of which you were once so proud. It's so overburdened that it's easier to get into the MAID program than it is to schedule a surgery. It's easier to be killed by the government than healed by the government. That's true, look it up. So, it's at exactly that point that they're like, oh, our country is underpopulated. In what sense? Who decided Canada was underpopulated? The second biggest country in the world with 40 million people in it? That sounds like paradise to me. Are you joking? And they're nice people. What is going on? The second reason no one wants to talk about it in Canada is because immigration has been a good thing for Canada over the years. Some of the coolest people in the world have moved to Canada, and the United States, by the way. Immigration is not bad. Immigration could, many people here are the product of fairly recent immigration. It's good. But like anything in the temporal world, it's not all good. It can be good. It can also be really bad. It can enhance your country. It can destroy your country. Choose. So if you have an immigration policy that makes your country stronger, your economy stronger, your country more cohesive, amen. And you have had that for generations. And everybody in Canada is happy about that. That's not what you have now. You have the wholesale importation of millions of people into your country for no obvious benefit. At exactly the time when your housing prices are so out of control, like, can your kids afford a house? This is true in my country too. And so the question you have to ask is, why is the government doing this? Is there an economic case to be made? Maybe there is. I've never heard it. Maybe there's some central planner who's decided this is going to make us all much happier and much more prosperous. They don't even attempt to convince you of that. They just shout slogans in your face, and if you ask a question, they call you a racist. And if you say, but I'm actually not a racist, and I'm not speaking for myself, I just want to know the answer. Why are you doing this? Without the consent of the governed, it's a decision you made unilaterally, and they won't answer your question. Diversity is our strength. Okay, that may be true. It may not be true. I don't know. It's a metaphysical question, actually. But in practical terms, why do we have the highest immigration rate in the world? Shut up! And of course, the answer is political power. Political power. This is a democracy. Your citizenship entitles you to choose your leaders. Your vote is valuable because there's a finite supply of those votes. It's very much unlike the Canadian dollar. Right? Or the US dollar. Which in a pinch they can just print more of. Then the Canadian dollars you have in your pocket are worth less. Do you know anything about this? Have you heard this principle before? It's called supply and demand. And if you misuse it, if you ignore the most basic law of economics, you wind up with, repeat after me, inflation. With which you are familiar. Just inflation. The same principle holds for citizenship in a democracy. And if you don't like the way that the public votes, import new voters. And that's precisely what they're doing. They're doing that in the United States as well. And here's my point. You're taking it. Because no one's saying anything. And I'm just warning you that if this was a mistake, if these were policies formulated by people who actually loved you and just gone off course and were doing the wrong thing, as you often do with your kids. If you have children, you often make the wrong decision with your kids. But you're brought back on course by your love for your children. So over time you make the right decisions. Because you're animated for a desire to protect them. Because you love them. But if you hated your children, all of your mistakes would be in one direction, and that direction would be toward destruction. And there is zero evidence that the Trudeau government loves you. And there's overwhelming evidence that they hate you and your family. How is that not true? If liberal and NDP politicians are sending fentanyl to your children, if you're trying to add your children to the list of people who can be killed by the state, who aren't even terminally ill, if they are changing the composition of your country without asking your permission, if every communication you have with Ottawa is a lecture about your moral deficiencies, you're a bad person, you're a racist. There's no love at all. There's only contempt. And the reason I'm saying this is not to upset anyone or hurt anyone's feelings, but it's very important. It's the most important thing to understand the terms of the debate and the consequences of its outcome. These are high-stakes questions. You thought Quebec separatism was a big deal. This is a big deal, which we're living through. And not just you, but the entire West. These exact issues mirror those throughout the Anglosphere. That would include the United States, and the UK, and Australia, and New Zealand. And for reasons that I can't fully comprehend, because I am not God, these trends are present in all of those countries at exactly the same time. And those countries are on the brink of becoming not salvageable. Because the people who live in them have been completely broken and led astray, misled by their leaders, and ultimately replaced by their leaders. And that's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact based on the numbers. And anyone who tells you, oh, that's a racist conspiracy theory, lay out the numbers for it. What are we looking at? What's the justification for this? Why are you doing this? As the people who are born here languish and decide it's better to die than to keep living here, why aren't you helping? So here's my advice. First thing you need to do, I think, in this country is figure out a way to tell people what's happening. And I would do it in a very Canadian style, in a non-inflammatory, highly rational, super polite, nice, but also uncompromising way. These are the stakes. This is the truth. I'm going to stand on the truth. Unfortunately, you have a couple of wonderful media outlets who I've spent a lot of time with in this country, but they're small. And they should be huge. All of your media, yeah, that's right, that's what I was thinking of. All of your media with only a few exceptions, are controlled by the state. It's not just CBC. We have an institution in our country called the CDC, which is almost as sinister. But you need a way for Canadians to know what's happening and to understand. You need a way. And it can't just be about Justin Trudeau, who's, if I can just say, so absurd that guy's gonna sashay off into history fairly soon. I think. Because, I mean, honestly, someone told me last night, I was talking to someone, to one of your countrymen at dinner last night, and Justin Trudeau's, who I've never met, though I know his cousin Gavin Newsom, but he's so ridiculous. He's so transparently phony. I mean, I'm mesmerized watching him. And so my very obvious, as a foreigner, question at dinner was, does anyone believe him? And everyone gives, oh yeah, young people do. And I hope that's not true. No, it's not true. But the point is, there can't be more than 20% of Canadians who think he's not repulsive, because he's just so obviously repulsive. Would you leave your kids with him? Would you be like, oh, you know, go to Canadian Tire for an hour. Justin, can you watch my kids? I don't think you're going to do that. Once you hand him your country, it's totally cool. Don't worry, he's a good steward. But he will collapse under the weight of his own ludicrousness and go back to Cuba or do whatever he does. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's just too great to check. But if I ever meet him, I'm going to demand a 23andMe, like right away. But he will disappear from the world stage, and you know, I don't think history's going to treat him well, and he'll probably be like a university professor or work for Bill Gates or something equally ignominious. But the problem won't end there, because he is part of a structure that is itself rotten, and the fact that it, you know, has elevated him to the top. And that's really the problem. And the only solution is for not radical people, but just clear-thinking people to say absolutely not, and here's why. And to stand firm in the face of their kryptonite, and their kryptonite is the word racist. And as someone who's been called racist like 50,000 times, I have kind of a PhD in this. And here's what I've learned. I'll never forget the first time that somebody on some other channel, CNN, or one of the totally discredited propaganda outlets in my country, like, he's a racist! And wow, it really hurt my feelings. And I thought, why can't they call me a racist? That's like horrifying. And my second thought was, am I a racist? Because when you're accused of something, I mean, it's just reflexive. Your first thought is to sort of take stock and ask yourself, you know, did I do the crime? And I thought to myself, no, I'm actually not. And then I decided, well, then why would I be? I mean, if they said, you know, Tucker Carlson gained 30 pounds this summer from eating pizza, I'd be totally ashamed, because of course that's true. But every summer, by the way, my whole life. But I'll admit it. But I'm not a racist, so I just decided, you know what? The only people who can really be upset about being called racist are the racists. And the rest of us can sort of stand strong and smile and say, I'm not a racist, I'm sorry. I just don't like you, actually. But that's the leash. That's how they keep you silent. And when they started calling people who question climate change, just cracks me up. In a country shaped by glaciers, has there been climate change before? I'm just wondering. Oh, did the glaciers melt because of SUVs? No, I don't know. We'll check. Anyway, climate change. But when they started saying that people who doubted climate change, it's hilarious, were racist, I was like, okay. Right. So my two pieces of advice, and I'll stop at this and we'll get to our panel with smarter people than I, is one, be strong inside, know who you are. If you're not a racist, it shouldn't hurt to be called one. It really shouldn't. And two, I've been attacked for calling Canadians humorless or whatever, and as I've said, I don't think that at all. I do think you've lost an awful lot of good comedians who fled your country to the South, because I do think it's hard to, there's a culture of self-restraint and of modesty here, clearly, and I think it's hard for Canadians to sort of mock someone else because it feels forbidden, and I get that, and I appreciate that sentiment. But now is the time for mockery. It is. It is. You are led by buffoons in costume. You really are. And if Christy Freeland, fascist midget, and Justin Trudeau, quirky little Justin Trudeau, those are your leaders, okay? And if you can't laugh in their faces, if your first response is, how do we get to a place where you, who I wouldn't hire to clean my pool, is running my country, get out of here, freak! Go back to your costume party. Laugh in their faces. Nothing is more empowering to you and more disempowering to them than laughter. Because the one thing they want is to be taken seriously. These are broken people. These are hollow people who are desperate for power because there's nothing else inside. There's nothing else inside. A normal person doesn't lust for power. He doesn't. He can use power to effect good, but power for its own sake is not interesting to him. In fact, it's dangerous, and wise people stay away from it. And so the kind of people who do lust for power are freaks. They're sideshow freaks. And the last thing they want is for you to say that out loud because they melt. Like a vampire at noon. They just disappear. And the second you laugh at them, you realize how good it feels to tell the truth. And you are empowered by the spirit of truth when you do that, and you become stronger. And so I look forward to your mockery of the people who misrule you. Thank you.
Believe it or not, I'm the moderator. I'd like to start by just replying to some of the things Tucker said. And generally, our challenge here tonight is that Tucker and Jordan and I agree on almost everything. So we're trying to get a bit of controversy going. But I would say this, Tucker. As far as I can see, the governing party in your country now has as its sole claim to resumption of its mandate the equation Trump equals Hitler, which is of course so fatuous and outrageous that no person with an IQ in at least double figures could believe it. And it will get the reception it deserves on election day, I think, despite massive efforts at stuffing the ballot boxes and bringing non-existent people onto the voting list. But because of that, I think we should be doubly careful about suggesting that Christy Freeland, whom I also know, I've known her for some years, is worse than the Nazis. I mean, she isn't. She's actually quite a nice lady, but she's politically misguided, has always been misguided. The FT, which you support, other than for hiring her, is itself not an acceptable publication anymore. It's a ludicrous, globalist, socialistic, interventionist, regimentationist paper. Not really the paper it was under Nigel Lawson and others of a legitimate newspaper for commerce, free commerce everywhere in the world. And so what we have is bad enough without suggesting it's it's Nazism or worse. It's
Well,
not that bad, but it's bad.
If I could just, and this is a problem that I have had my whole life. I don't fully explain what I think, and you raise a really good point. I made a serious charge against her, and let me just be a lot more precise about why I believe what I said. I saw the video the other day, and I've never taken her seriously, as I said. But I didn't think that she was as malicious and cold as I now believe she is until I saw the video of David Menzies from Rebel News being arrested to try to ask her a question. And I thought to myself, as someone who is often approached by people as I walk into buildings with questions, how would I feel if someone approached me and asked a question, even a question I don't like, and my security team threw him against a wall and put him in handcuffs? I would say, you stop that immediately. I could not, as a matter of conscience, allow a man to be arrested in my presence for asking a question. And I think that anyone who thinks that's okay is a truly dangerous person who should not have power. That's how I feel.
I agree with you, except I don't think she ordered it. I think
But she watched it.
No, let me say something. I think in a way what happened is even more worrisome than that. Some palooka from the RCMP took it upon himself as a demonstration of initiative, precisely the kind of initiative you attributed to the people in goose-stepping in tight uniforms. I mean, many people, especially in the United States, still think of the RCMP as people in red tunics with a musical bride and, you know, Rosemary with Nelson Eddy and so on, singing in the Rockies here. But we saw in the MacDonald Commission inquiry after the imposition of the War Measures Act by the elder Trudeau in 1970, what an absolutely incompetent bunch of palookas the RCMP are. So some of the blame belongs on them.
I agree, but it's her security detail, and as someone, I know you spend a lot of your life with security around you or whatever, you just can't allow that. You just cannot allow people to behave that way, because it's such a violation of human rights, and that's happening in this country, and no one's saying anything about it.
I want to turn to Jordan. We've had discussions in Calgary earlier today and last night, and I emerged as the optimist. And I'm not an absolute optimist, but in fact, I think the public is turning in this country and in the United States. I'm afraid as a member of the British Parliament, I can't hold out any hope for England for the next 5 years, but it'll come to its senses eventually. But I think it's turning, and we see it tonight. We see it, believe it or not, it is even the case in Toronto where you Albertans have more friends and admirers than you think, including Jordan and me. A city, I may say that I understand Albertans don't like Toronto, and I don't blame them, but when Tucker compares Toronto to Gary, Indiana, which is a bombed-out rubble heap of abandoned steel factories and rioters and drug dealers, he stirs up something I was not aware that I possessed, and that was a bit of municipal chauvinism. I would like to ask Jordan, on this business of, I mean, we agree. I think everyone in this great statement agrees with Tucker's denunciation of our health system. It's a shambles and a disgrace, and it is so bad that, as he said, the health system that's supposed to promote life is now selling the virtues of suicide, and not only to sick people, to poor people as well, as if you have no chance of recovering and becoming prosperous. But Jordan, where do you stand on this optimism, pessimism scale that Tucker and I have built up a little?
I think we have every reason to assume that, and I guess this is why going around the world talking to people, I guess, is that I think that if we put our hearts and our souls into it, that we could make this world into a place that's so good we could hardly imagine it. And I think with the technology that's in front of us, which is transforming at a rate that's beyond comprehensible, literally, that we could do much better in the next 50 years than we did in the last 200, and that's really saying something. But I also think that if we let the worst parts of ourselves gain the upper hand, given our enhanced technological power, we could produce a hell that would make Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany look like practice. And so there's a great hope in that, but a great warning. And one of the things you all want to consider too is that because you're so much more powerful than people were in the past with the technology that you have at your disposal, with the influence that you can have in the world, that all your particular and individual moral flaws are going to find their amplification in the world in a way that wasn't really evidently true in the past. And so I think that if we got our act together, things could be unbelievably positive. But if we remain narcissistic, infantile, and foolish, like certain of our leaders, then things could go extraordinarily badly. And I think we'll see how that plays out in the course of the lifetimes of most of the people in this room.
I had the honor of sharing a podcast with the eminent historian Victor Hanson and the former U.S. drug czar and education secretary Bill Bennett. And Victor presents, I think very accurately, the correlation of forces in our English-speaking countries, societies that Tucker referred to. The enemy of practically all of us here, unless they're spies from the CBC or elsewhere, they possess the academy, they possess the media, they possess Wall Street and the equivalent to an extent in Canada. Silicon Valley, which I agree with you is an abominable place. You should direct your strictures against them instead of Toronto. And they have big entertainment and big sport. I mean, people are tremendously talented at entertaining and athletics, but are utter morons politically, malignant morons, many of them. They have all of that, but we have the people, and we are going to show that. And despite their attempt to steal elections in your country, we don't much stoop to that here, although we may learn, we imitate everything else you do. Despite that, we're going to win, and I feel I'm very confident about that. And what Jordan said, even the period since World War II, when the great powers haven't been at war with each other, has shown an astounding increase in prosperity in the world. The total percentage in the whole world, huge populations it now has, that's in designated poverty, severe poverty, is definitely going to lose our position of moral and practical leadership if we underperform, as this country now is underperforming. So, but, you know, I wish I could say I could suggest any better way of getting out of this and reversing the trend than the one I have. Polls and change governments, I think we'll get what we want. The people do get the government we deserve, and if we deserve a good government, we'll get a good government. And you have one here in Alberta.
May I just clarify one thing? I'm sorry to beat up on Toronto, and I'm certainly sorry to compare it to Gary, Indiana.
Don't worry about it.
Toronto's not the worst place in the world. And Toronto is not with the city itself, which is, again, fine, for Toronto, and the vision of the future that Toronto represents. And so the question that no one ever asks about most places is, what do they do here? What's the point of the city? What's the business here? What do they add to the country? And Toronto represents a vision that I reject, which is an economy based on banking and real estate. I don't think it's a real economy. I think banking has its place, real estate has its place. I don't think you can build a country on that, and I don't think you should. This province represents the alternative vision, which I support, which is a place that actually adds to the sum total of good in a country, that produces energy and food. And energy and food are non-negotiables. You have to have them. You do not have to have banking, and you do not have to have commercial real estate. Okay, you just don't. There are places without them. In fact, most of history has been sort of fine without them. but no place can exist without energy or food. And so when I see the relative Toronto, that part of Ontario, I'm like, this is out of whack. There is no sane world in which a city that produces nothing is more impressive than a province that produces everything that the country needs.
Jordan, you're a renowned psychologist, and you're
So
renowned. Most recently emphasized by the attempt of your peers to discipline you and send you for lessons in public relations. The fact that they would do this does indicate how extraordinarily accomplished you are and how widely admired you are. And notwithstanding my city of residence, I'm very proud that you replaced our former mayor, Rob Ford, as the world's most famous Canadian. I want to ask you, as a psychologist, do you think that the psychology of the United States and Canada right now, mass psychology, is such that we are in upward mode? We're going to cast off the incompetence that has ruled us and the perfidy and venality that has ruled us, and do a better job of self-government? I mean, is the psychology right for an upward movement, or do you feel we're sinking?
No, I think, again, I would say I'm optimistic on that front too, because I think the best thinkers that I've encountered, and I'm privileged because, well, apart from the fact that I'm male and white, obviously. Sorry about that.
Don't forget you're a meeting.
I've been privileged to meet some of the world's brightest people and to talk to them in depth.
Thank you guys so much for watching.
I see a realization
Like and share this out.
dawning, even in unlikely places, that the core values of our civilization, and those are really Judeo-Christian values, are valid, true, and irreplaceable. And let me explain what I've seen. So, in recent months, I've watched a number of surprising conversions or semi-conversions. And so, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, some of you may know of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and if you don't, you should, because she's one of the world's bravest people. And she was a real admirer of the new atheists for a long time, and she had her reasons, because she suffered greatly at the hand of psychopathic fundamentalists. And she's concluded that the Christianity that underlies our society is irreplaceable and has actually converted. That, despite being an admirer for a very long time of the new atheists, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, were very intelligent people, by the way, but wrong in a deeply interesting way. Her husband, Neil Ferguson, who was also an atheist, has also converted. My friend Douglas Murray, who was also a follower of the new atheists, now realizes and understands, and I would say intellectually, that a humanism unmoored from a deep metaphysical substrate will fall prey to the kind of ideological lunacy that now characterizes our times and that threatened the entire planet a number of times in the 20th century. I can see this happening all over, and there are deep reasons for that, and they're going to become more evident in very short order. And so I think we're on the verge of a conscious metaphysical revolution that will reveal to us once again the profundity, depth, necessity, and value of the core propositions that made the West free, prosperous, and great. And so,
May I just add one thing to that? I couldn't agree with that more. I can't express it as eloquently as you just did, and I want to try. But I'll say two things. One, I noticed that, and I've never been an atheist, but I've never been, that far from atheism. I always lived in sort of ritual educated world among people who mock the religious because they're primitive. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I have heard more people talk about the possibility that all that we can experience with our senses is not all that there is. And of course that's true, it's obviously true, and there's no society in human history that's believed otherwise. Only the West, since we dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima, only the West, since 1945, has proceeded as a society with the assumption that there's no God. It's never happened before, and of course it doesn't work at all. That's changing really fast, and I feel it. I also see, and it's very obvious if you just look for it, that the main thing that people who run this country and my country and a lot of Western countries hate is Christianity. They hate it more than anything. And you see it in their behavior. You see it in the arrests of Christian pastors. And if there's one group in the world, whether you're a Christian or not, you certainly don't need to be a Christian to acknowledge what's obviously true. These are the least threatening, least bad people in your society. These are the people who mean you the least harm. These are the people who commanded to pray for their enemies. These are people who commanded to give up their life for people they don't know and for others. And so again, you don't have to be an adherent of that religion to see those people as a group you might want more of. Because what's the downside to having people who love you despite the fact you hate them? Like, that seems like you want more of those. And yet those people are the first to get arrested. And their churches are burned, 90 in this country, with the full tacit support of your government. Like, what is that? Why are they going after them? Of all the problems your country has, my country has, why are the Christians being persecuted? And they are being persecuted. Well, it tells you there's something else going on here. Maybe their goals, maybe this is part of something bigger. I mean, just meditate on that for the weekend and see the conclusion you come to. That's all I would say.
On this, Tucker, I have to agree with you completely. I'm afraid that Canada is in the forefront of advanced Western countries with a Judeo-Christian tradition and a tradition of tolerance also. On the forefront, the vanguard of effectively shedding our, even what is now a officious and paper-thin adherence to the idea of a divine intelligence existing. We're getting perilously close all the time. And you see it in judgments of the Supreme Court that are terribly poorly reasoned and agitate against any religious notions that should cause them to temper their idea of interpretation of the law. And I would just say that we, all of us, know enough that I'm not talking about what people's religious practices or anything like that. That's none of my business. But if you banish absolutely the idea in a militant atheistic manner that it is impossible that there are any spiritual forces or anything whatsoever beyond what we absolutely know, you are creating a vacuum in the human mind and in society that ultimately will be filled by horrible pagan monsters like Hitler and Stalin.
Can I say one thing? This is, one of the saddest facts of our current civilization is that, there's just no history. The iPhone makes history irrelevant. It's all about right now. But it's worth, learning some things about history, and here's my recommendation. Spend, an afternoon reading about the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the Spanish Civil War, and what do they all have in common? At their heart was a desire not to replace Christianity with reason, as the Jacobins claimed, but to crush and destroy and to humiliate Christians in a way that's very reminiscent of what the Romans did in the 1st and 2nd centuries. is not just like, oh, and we're going to ritually humiliate you. And that is very much what the trans thing is about. No one is helped by transgenderism. You've never met anyone who is happier because he's self-castrated. I personally feel very sorry for trans people. I'm not angry at them at all. I think they are victims of bigger forces. But to officially promote that is a humiliation ritual designed to put Christians in an untenable position where they have to either swear allegiance to the new state religion, which is transgenderism, or to their ancestral religion, which is Christianity. It is a loyalty test, and it's meant to humiliate and destroy them. And let's just be honest about what we're seeing.
So, I've been thinking of this place for a very long time. You know, I became convinced 40 years ago, I suppose, of the existence of evil in some transcendent sense. I suppose when I tried to look for something that I could claim with unshakable faith, what I discovered was that there were certain acts that occurred in the 20th century that were so brutal and so malevolent that they absolutely convinced me of the reality of evil. That's necessary to understand, is that if evil and absolute evil exists, first of all, if absolute evil doesn't exist, then what happened in Auschwitz was just a matter of opinion, right? The moral catastrophe of Auschwitz is just an opinion. And that in itself is a conclusion that has no small degree of malevolence. So we should be clear about that. If what happened in Auschwitz, if the fact that Auschwitz camp guards could conduct themselves in the utterly brutal manner that they did and enjoy it, if that was evil, and that's a fact, then, hey, pipe down. This isn't your conference. Then there's an opposite. Right? If you identify something on one pole, you've implicitly identified something on the other pole. And so one of the things you might say is that whatever absolute good might be, and that would be something akin to God, would be that which is as far away from Auschwitz as you can possibly get. And to pursue that would be to pursue the direction that leads you as far away, let's say, from the horrors of Nazi Germany as you could get. And I believe that technically there is no difference between that and the pursuit of a religious path. And then I would say, if it's true that the core of malevolence is something like the sacrifice of others in a painful manner to your own idiot whims and desire for power, which isn't a bad encapsulation, then the opposite of that would be your voluntary self-sacrifice in the service of what's best and others. And that is the ideal that Christianity puts at the center of the moral universe. And so I don't see a way around that. And that's not a conclusion that I drew lightly, for what that's worth. I spent 40 years thinking about very little else than that. And I think that we're going to come to understand that consciously, widely, far more rapidly than anyone suspects, for any number of reasons. And that will be, well, the consequences of that are very difficult to predict, but the fact that it's going to occur is definitely one of the things that makes me optimistic. We've all been faced in the 20th century, I would say, with the irrefutable evidence of transcendent evil. And that means we all now have the opportunity to discover the irrefutable existence of transcendent good, and to allow that to guide us. And if with our technological power we had the capacity to be guided by what is truly and transcendently good, then there's nothing we couldn't accomplish in the positive direction.
Tucker, whether everybody in this country is happy with it or not, the whole world is extremely heavily influenced by the United States. And whatever any of us think of any American regime, none of us in the West should ever fail to remember and be grateful for the fact that we owe chiefly to the United States the greatest strategic, bloodless victory in the history of the world, our victory of Western civilization in the Cold War and the tremendous spread of democracy and the free market in the world. We owe it chiefly to your country, and we must never forget that. So with that in mind, I'd like you to be as daring as you can and as perceptive as only you can be as someone who knows the United States, all of the United States very well. What do you predict is going to happen in this political year in that country?
You know, thank you. I couldn't be more grateful to be an American. I've always felt that way. As I said, my dad's family was from Nova Scotia. They left at the time of the American Revolution because they didn't want to be free, so they fled to the Maritimes. And, just kidding. But anyway, and then they came back, ultimately. Many are still there. Their name is Rayfuse. I think they're liberal. But I have always been grateful for my birthright as an American and for the God-given rights that are protected by my government officially in the Bill of Rights, which is a beautiful document, the greatest document we've ever produced, and that no other country has. So, and I will feel that way till I die. And unlike a lot of people in our leadership class, I have no plans to go anywhere else. I've got too many children and too many dogs, and I'm dying there. But I'm definitely very concerned, and I can't see the outcome of this year clearly at all. I was thinking yesterday, it really is like looking through a shower curtain. You see these opaque shapes lurking, but you can't tell if they're, friend or foe, nude or clothed. You don't really know what you're looking at. But you know that there is a collision coming between titanic forces, the population of America versus its leaders. And it's coming to a head because of the structure of this election. And so you have the Republican candidate, and he is going to be the candidate, whose election is the one thing. I think it's kind of determined. And of course it's politics, so it's filled with all sorts of, the amount of ugliness display beneath the surface in all politics everywhere is really awe-inspiring. These people are really dirty everywhere, not just my country. You may know about that. But the one thing that the people in power, and I don't just mean in Washington in our government, I mean in our financial centers and entertainment centers, our country's kind of cool because they're identified by cities. So Los Angeles, New York, Washington make all the decisions, of course. And the one thing they won't tolerate is the orange man in power. And you sort of, you wonder, well, why? Because Trump is not a radical at all. And Trump's vision for America, this is an informed assessment of Trump, Trump's vision for America is like Studio 54 in 1978. I'm serious. Trump really loved the country, he grew up and he really loved it, and he means it. He loved the people who lived there, he loved its traditions, its weird little customs, its idiosyncrasies, and that's kind of what he wants. He doesn't want a brave new future of new things. He wants to return not to antebellum America, but to 1980 America. And it's kind of hard to argue why that's bad, actually. And so that's not a revolutionary agenda, nor is it a counter-revolutionary agenda. It's a return to normalcy. And the phrase, make America great again, means return it to a period not so long ago, when everyone was enfranchised and everyone had rights, and everyone was roughly, not everyone, but most people were sort of united in a sense of common purpose and culture. They were Americans, and they knew what that meant. We don't have that anymore, and that's Trump's vision. So you may not think that's possible. You may not think maybe that's even virtuous to want that. But if you think that's a grotesque hellscape that he's describing, you're the freak, not him. And yet they all feel that way. They mean it too, they really feel that way. It's not a joke. And so what's going to happen? And I guess I dissent a little bit from the much more optimistic view that you have, both of you, which I really appreciate hearing, and I want to believe it, but that in the end, the will of the people matters. The conclusion that I've come to is that it matters less than it should, and that the people in power really do make the bulk of the decisions. And I say that after spending 35 years in Washington and watching the agenda of both parties and comparing that agenda to the public opinion polling of what people actually want and finding no union set. No union set. Like, there's not the same agendas. And we have a democratic system where these people are elected every 2 years in the Congress, every 6 years in the Senate, every 4 years in the White House. And their agenda never changes, and the desires of the American public, by and large, are never met or even addressed. And you sort of, after a while, conclude, maybe it doesn't matter what people want, it only matters what people in power want. I don't want to think that, but I don't know what other conclusion to reach. So what you have now is a legit mass movement on behalf of Donald Trump that's 100% real, and you have absolute, ironclad resistance to the democratic process working its way to a legitimate conclusion by the people who have all the power. What happens next? I don't even know. And I'll sum it up this way. Today, it is a race in the foreseeable future between Donald Trump, the former president, now effectively the Republican nominee, and the incumbent president, who got more votes than Barack Obama somehow, because he's just so popular. It's just the magnetism. He spent the entire 2020 campaign moldering and deteriorating in his basement, and somehow he was more popular than Barack Obama. Right, okay. Anyway, so it's the race between Biden and Obama. I just don't see that happening. I just don't. And that, I hope to be wrong. I want to return to normalcy too. I'm the opposite of revolutionary too. That's what I love about Trump. He doesn't want radical change. We're not actually made for radical change. We can't digest it. People hate radical change. They want kind of continuity, and I do too. But I just don't see this playing out the way it's currently formulated. Sorry.
So I would say maybe that, and you, Tucker, you actually asked for an alternative to the view that you were expressing, the somewhat pessimistic view of the dominance of people in power. In the video that led up to your entrance onto the stage, you pointed out a realization that you had, which was that nothing better in your life can happen to you than what happens if you tell the truth. And I believe that to be the case. I actually believe that that's why we have the idea that power is vested in the people. And I don't think that power is where people think it is. I don't think that power is in the hands of the elite. The ability to manipulate and misuse power might be in the hands of the elite, but the power that we need to set the world straight is actually at your fingertips. And this is actually a rather terrifying realization, because there's some relief in thinking that the elites can do whatever they want, and there's nothing that someone as small as you could possibly do about it. And that's wrong because you're not small. And it's wrong because it's irresponsible to presume that. And it's wrong because the truth is more terrifying and also more liberating. And the truth of the matter is that if you utilized what you had at hand, which at least is the ability that you have at hand to say what you think truly and as clearly as you can, even if you're not that articulate, that the world would change around you in ways that would make you immune to the blandishments of the power-mongering elite. And I'm hoping that enough people will realize the power of their affinity with the truth, especially when it's allied with the will to aim up, to have the courage to speak that truth. And if enough people do that, then the terrible things that we're concerned about coming forward at us in the future will have no purchase whatsoever. I learned a long time ago that the war that we're in is psychological or spiritual, if you want to look at it that way, rather than political. And everyone has a sense of that now, that something is moving that's deeper than the mere political. The tectonic plates themselves are shifting, and you're all going to play a role in that, and the role you'll play is going to be determined by what you determine to ally your speech with, for example, your decision about whether or not you're going to tell the truth in the confines of your own life. And if enough people, all of you, if enough of you decide in the local circumstances of their own life to dare to say what you believe to be true, then the tyrants will have no purchase on you and you won't be slaves. And just by definition,
Would be kind of funny. It would be kind of funny.
I just want to say what a beautiful sentiment I think that is, and I wish I had said that. I'm so thankful that you said that. And the message that I often get, who knows from where, is that when I really feel like things are falling apart, that really the only thing I can do is to really try my best to be a better person. And that really matters. And specifically, I mean, to tell the truth all the time, not just in public, but in private, to really love the people around me, and be attentive to them more than anything. And that in doing that, you lose your fear of the future. And you know that no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. You're not afraid of death. And anyway, thank you for saying that.
Since Tucker didn't exactly answer my question, I'm going to give an answer and ask you to comment. Many of the people in the stadium would be aware that I'm probably, though not an uncritical one, the most vocal and consistent supporter of President Trump in Canada. And that is based on the fact that it's been my privilege to know him for 25 years, and he's always been a good and loyal friend, including in the worst of times that I endured when many of his financial peers in the United States and in this country had a merciless attack of amnesia and forgot my phone number, and he did not. But I also evaluate him as a statesman, and I put it to you, Tucker, that there is a really a clearly discernible tendency in the run-up to your election. The forces that abominate Trump and even highly intelligent friends of mine and yours, who, when the word Trump is uttered, other than the bridge card playing context, a trap door opens in the forehead and a cuckoo bird flies out. It's screeching nonsense. These people, so obsessed with the hatred of their president, are gradually losing ground. I mean, in the last election, to defeat Trump, they had to mail out unsolicited 81 million ballots. Millions of them were collected. None of them could be verified. They were dropped in drop boxes out in the rural America in the middle of the night, not on election day. And on this basis, the judiciary abdicated its role as a co-equal branch of your government and wouldn't hear any of the substantive cases, or 19 of them. They wouldn't hear any of them. And they wouldn't judge on the constitutionality of the changes in voting and vote counting rules, supposedly to assist voting during the pandemic, but really to screw Trump. And they were aggravated by the media locking arms and saying every word that Trump and his supporters have uttered criticizing that election were lies, not things they disagreed with, lies, conscious, intentional lies, deliberate, premeditated lies. And this has so annoyed such a large group of Americans that they become progressively angrier the more unreasonable the attempt to destroy democracy by the incumbents has become. They see the effective leader of the opposition, a former president, buried under an avalanche of absolutely nonsensical, spurious indictments, politically motivated. They've seen the corruption of the intelligence agencies with the Trump-Russia nonsense. They've seen the FBI director Comey saying 245 times under oath, I don't recall, about events a couple of years before having to do with his role in taking a pastiche of defamations, calling it intelligence and putting it out into the media. That's all been paid for by the Clinton campaign. The country sees it, and it is getting angrier and angrier. And I think there's a sort of rumbling noise in America what is going to happen is ultimately, although it won't be quite put this way, it'll be a referendum between those who so hate Trump they're prepared to justify any desecration and debasement and violation of the constitutional democracy of America to keep him out of the White House, and those who are so horrified at this desecration of the Constitution that they're absolutely determined to put him back in the White House. And I think he will win, and I think the fact that he will win, when cant and emotionalism subside and serious history is written, I think it will be seen as one of the great positive watermarks in the strengthening and reinforcement of American democracy.
When Conrad Black ran the media in this country, it was a better time. That was a wonderful summation of the 2020 election in which Democrats cheated at scale. Fact. And I hope it plays out in the way that you described. And in my personal view of it, my views align pretty substantially with Donald Trump's. Even if they didn't, I would vote for Donald Trump because you can't end 250 years of representative democracy because you don't like a candidate. Period. You can't indict people for political reasons, which they have done. And you can't take people off the ballot in the name of democracy when they haven't been convicted of a crime. I mean, it's like so nuts. So if you care about the systems that your ancestors created, and which was the envy of the world, I mean, half the world, more than half the world, modeled their democracies after our democracy. So if your democracy is erased because people don't like Trump, it's kind of a profound change, not just in your country, but in the world. And that's not a good change. You just don't want that. So I absolutely hope that it plays out that way. I guess part of what I was saying is I don't believe with Trump up 8 points or whatever he is now over Biden, in the face of 4 indictments, facing life in prison for non-crimes. So the more you know about it, the more it defies belief, and I think Conrad Black explained it fairly well. He's still leading Joe Biden. So if the point of the Democratic Party is to hold power, there's nothing ideological with the Democratic Party, the idea is we should have the power and you shouldn't, that's it. They're about to lose power to Trump because Biden is so demonstrably incompetent. And they're going to make a change of some kind. That's not acceptable. So I don't know what that change is going to be, but I spent my life living with them, so I know what they're like. And there will be a change. They will not lose to Trump if they can help it. And I mean it. And if that means replacing Biden or doing something unspeakable, they will do it. But they're very serious about this. The other side is much more serious about power than normal people are. Normal people understand that power is like, literally this is like a double-edged thing. It's nice to have it, but it can also destroy you. They don't necessarily want power. I definitely don't want power. But a certain kind of hollow person needs it above all. So I just think, beware. They're capable of anything.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to wind this up. So I'm going to say one brief final comment on the American thing and then ask Jordan to close for the three of us. I just very briefly make 2 points. I think that the Trump haters hate isn't there anymore. He doesn't have to walk his tweets back. His conduct is not embarrassing or gauche. And the Trump they hated, they portrayed with, he gave them plenty of ammunition to do it, as a boorish, boastful caricature of the ugly American. He isn't there anymore, and what has replaced him is a man who, of course, is confident, and an ex-president and a billionaire tends to be confident, but he is an underdog being persecuted and fighting it courageously, and everybody respects that. And I don't think people realize how the public reaction to him has evolved according to that. And the final point I'd make is, so often all of us here who are generally conservative lament that our party in whichever country is often sort of on a suicide mission. But this time, inexplicably to me, the Democrats are. They appear to be circling the drain ostensibly led by a senescent, sticky-fingered old boob who couldn't run a two-cart funeral. On that, it pains me to be disrespectful of the occupant of so great an office, but I'm afraid that's an accurate description. On that, I yield the chair to my distinguished friend.
Well, we talked tonight, about the political law, and I would say to some degree we centered on that. We talked a fair bit as well about the psychological and the spiritual, and I guess one of the things we might do is reflect on the proper ordering of those. If there's a moral world, let's say, that has a hierarchical ordering, one of the things that was realized long ago is that there's a dominion of God and there's a dominion of Caesar's, and that you render unto God what is God's and unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And we rendered a fair bit unto Caesar tonight, and maybe I close with some concluding words about what it would mean to render unto God and what it would mean for you all as individuals, and that would allow us to reflect a little bit more on this idea of upward aim and truth. I think it's laudable that you're all here, even if it's primarily for political reasons, because I think that people in a democracy, in a representative democracy, in a free society, people who aren't slaves have to take their political responsibility with all due seriousness, right? Otherwise, you're not self-governing. You abdicate that responsibility to other people, and you'll abdicate it. If you abdicate it, you'll abdicate it to the psychopaths who enjoy power, and you're not going to like the consequence of that. And so you have to shoulder your political responsibility, but then you also have to see it in the proper perspective. And I think Tucker was making an allusion to that, is that you have your important destiny right in front of you. You have to take responsibility for your own lives. Treat yourself as if you have a certain implicit, intrinsic value, that you're made in the image of God, you might say. You have to treat the people around you, your wife, your husband, as if they have the same value as you, and you have to do everything to foster their development in your relationship, and you have to do that with your family, and then your family has to do that with its community, your town, and your local businesses, your friends, and then all of those local enterprises have to do that at the level of city and province. And then if there's anything left over, the higher order political system can deal with that. But you want to walk out of here tonight thinking about how you want to aim the world in the proper place. Part of that is your political deliberations, but much more of that is the ethic that you bring forward in your life and in your words. And I truly believe, as I said, that you have a very important role to play in how the world's going to lay itself out. Are we going to be optimistic or pessimistic? I would say to a very large degree, and more than you think. It depends on the decision that you make with every act you take about whether or not you're aiming towards something better or towards something worse. And to the degree that you're aiming at something worse, you'll get exactly what you're asking for. And to the degree that you're aiming at something better, you could play a signal force in bringing that about. And the better you got at that, as your aim improved and the truth of your words mounted in power, the more effective a force you would be in promoting what's good. And you have that opportunity, as we all do. And so I would say in closing, we can watch this strange political year unfold, and we can hope for the best, but we can also strive with all of our might to make sure that we're part of the force that's actually aiming at the best. And we can all do that.
Thank
thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and follow. If you guys like this content, please consider donating. CodyTunes@shaw.ca. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.